Let's see. Jill, can we do a quick audio and video check with you to make sure the connection is on?
Sure. There's the audio and
It's
with a bit of
working.
video. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, good night for you, 11 p.m. But hopefully this storm won't disrupt the connection and we'll have you with us throughout. Yes.
Keep my fingers crossed.
Yeah. Kara, I see your video is working. Let's do a quick audio check.
Hi.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. For those speakers in the plenary, Jill, don't be surprised if you are made co-host because everybody else is going to be muted. And so we'll have to make all speakers co-host so that they can speak during presentation.
Yeah, so that'll happen after Ambassador Steinberg's remarks. We'll do that for all of the research team. We'll add them.
Yeah. Okay, Elaine's here. Let's see.
Sarah, can you email the link
Zippy is
to
here.
do you have,
No, she's
oh,
here.
she is.
Zippy is
Great.
here.
Okay.
I think, yeah, with Zippy, then we would have finished the check for everyone. So let's just. Zippy, are you here? Oh, she's having trouble joining, it seems. And then are we ready to let people into the room? We had said 7:50, it's 7:52. So after the tech check with Zippy, are we all set, Anna? Okay, perfect.
I'm going off camera now while people are coming in.
Sure, yes. Please turn on your cameras when you're speaking or at 8 a.m. But for now, thank you. Okay, sure. Sure. Anna, when the call to action is being issued, and Carrie's going to ask people to join the movement and the team, could you please put the link to the subscription link for the movement on the into the chat box? Thank you. John, you may need to call Zippy to troubleshoot because she is trying multiple times and she is not able to log in. Oh, Samuel's muted.
I'm working on it.
Zippy, are you able to unmute and switch on your camera for a tech check?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Okay, perfect. Camera is working
Yeah.
and we can hear you. Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Are you able to hear us?
Breaking a little bit, but I can hear. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Thank you.
Perfect. Zippy, we will be making all speakers co-hosts. So don't be surprised if you see that notice pop up. It's because everybody else will be muted in the session.
All right.
Okay.
Noted.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I think with that, we are all set to let people in. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We will be starting the event at exactly 8 a.m. Eastern Time. We do have simultaneous interpretation available. If Deanna, could you put up the slide deck, please? So that people can see how they can use the interpretation channels for French and Spanish. Thank you so much. So if you're a French or a Spanish speaker, you will see instructions on the slide deck on how to use the interpretation channel. We have also pasted links to the slide decks in Spanish and French into the chat box. So please use the links so that you can follow with the presentations. The presentations are available in both languages. Once again, welcome everyone. We will be starting in a couple of minutes. If you are using the French or the Spanish interpretation channels, you will see instructions on the slide deck on how to do so. The channels are now active. You will also see in the chat window a link to the slide decks in Spanish and French. So please click on them so that you can follow through with the presentations. It's exactly 8 a.m. I know people are still trickling in, But in the interest of time, we are going to get started. The last 1.5 years have changed the way we operate, and everybody has become familiar with Zoom, so we can keep the logistics section very short and very quick. As you heard, this event is being recorded. It's also being live streamed at mcld.com/live. We are going to be using a meeting format for today. However, given the number of people that we have on the call and also the purpose of the meeting, we have adapted it slightly. So we are going to start as a webinar, which means that all chat will be disabled except during the research presentation, where we will take questions on chat, and all mics will be muted. After the plenary is over, we will go back to our regular meeting format, where you will be able to engage, ask questions, unmute yourselves, and chat will be active. We have simultaneous interpretation available in Spanish and French. The interpretation channels are now on. So if you are a French or a Spanish speaker, please click on the interpretation button, and you can also see the instructions on the slide deck on how to access the interpretation channels. My colleague will be posting into the chat box in just a minute the slide decks in Spanish and French, so you can follow along there. With that, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on the time of the day in your part of the world. I know we had participants from over 60 countries registered for today's event. So between us, we pretty much cover all the time zones. I'm Gunjan Veda, Senior Advisor with the Movement for Community-Led Development. And over the last 2.5 years, it has been my absolute privilege and honor to work with and lead the multicultural, multinational, multi-organizational collaborative research team of the movement, which comprises of highly dedicated professionals who've been so passionate about community-led development that they have spent countless hours over the last 2.5 years working pro bono over and above their work to look at, well, what is our practice of community-led development? What is its impact? And how can we measure this impact and improve our practice? I see many of them and are members of our advisory group in the audience today. A heartfelt thank you. Before we proceed any further, I also wanted to acknowledge that today's event and the study that we will be presenting have been made possible by a grant under the Implementer-Led Design Evidence Analysis and Learning activity supported by USAID. If this event was taking place 5 or even 3 years ago, I would have started differently. I would have started by making a case for why community-led development is not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do. After all, think of all the power, the potential, and the promise that exists in every community. If we can realize that, this world will change. The last 1.5 years have changed our world. As international borders closed, the world went into lockdowns, expats had to move out of the countries they were in. We saw communities, community leaders, and local civil society organizations come together to protect themselves and their neighbors. From India to Malawi to Benin to Bangladesh to Mexico, name it, and we saw innovations, creative ways in which, with very limited resources, community leaders shared information, fought misinformation, and fought the virus. If they could do this in a pandemic, imagine what they could do in a world without the pandemic with adequate resources. So why are we here today? Next slide, please. The pandemic has shown us that communities are the first responders in any crisis. It's also highlighted the need to put communities front and center in development. But many questions remain. How do we do this effectively? What does community leadership and facilitation look like? And what is the human process of change that it triggers? How and in what circumstances does it lead to impacts? These are all unanswered questions that we need to answer. And last year, in partnership with Charles Darwin University of Australia, we began a rapid realist review to unpack some of these questions. Today, we are here to share with you our findings. So the structure of this event, it's a two-part event, as you will see. We begin with a 75-minute plenary. We go into a quick 5-minute breaks. We will give you breathing space. And then we come back for a deep dive session with the research team. In the plenary, we'll do a very quick introduction to MCLD. Then we'll hear from our keynote speaker, Ambassador Donald Steinberg, who is the expert advisor to the USAID Administrator on localization. And Ambassador Steinberg is going to share with us the thinking around the new upcoming localization agenda and the local capacity building policy of USAID. The research team members will then tell us what did they do, what did they find, and what does this mean for us. Susan Wong from World Bank is going to be the respondent, and she's going to talk about translating these findings into action. We will have 3 powerful influencers, Tim Pruitt, Carrie Hessler-Radelet, and Zippy Wambua issue a call to action. And Brian Hunter from Save the Children will issue the close. In the deep dive session, we will have breakout groups with the research team where we will deep dive into different clusters of findings. That's also where we will answer any questions that you may have around the research. So next slide, please. What is the Movement for Community-Led Development? In 2015, the movement was launched the same day that the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by the UN General Assembly. A group of organizations got together and said, well, this is wonderful, but if we are truly serious about achieving the SDGs, we have to ensure that every person has a right to voice in decisions that affect their lives. What started as an initiative with a group of dedicated organizations is today a powerful global movement with over 1,500 local CDOs and 74 INGOs from around the world. We have national chapters and thematic working groups, and the Hunger Project is the global secretariat for the movement. Next slide, please. So in the movement, we've identified 5 goals for ourselves. Voice and agency for women, youth, and marginalized groups. Adequate community finance. At least 20% of the funding has to be divulged to the local level. Good local governance, quality public services, and resilience. How do we do this? Well, we're going to look at our theory of change. Next slide, please. The national chapters are the heart and soul of our movement. We have 17 of them already, and more are coming up. These are groups of local organizations, national NGOs, and even international INGOs who work together to advocate for decentralization and devolution. They also facilitate healthy, productive, resilient, self-reliant communities through community-led development programming. And when these 2 things happen together, we see systemic change. At the Global Secretariat of the movement, we support the national chapters through capacity sharing, through making sure they have a voice, and by generating the evidence that they need to convince policymakers. Next slide. And this brings me really to our collaborative research team. In 2019, the world was still asking, does CLD deliver on its promises? In the movement, we believed that it did, but we knew that we needed evidence to prove this. We also needed to understand how do we strengthen our own work and how do we measure the impact of our work. And so 35 professionals from 23 different organizations came together to look at questions of practice and impact and to co-create tools to do so. Since then, our team has grown rapidly. And in January this year, many of you joined us when we launched a CLD assessment tool to improve the practice of CLD, a quality assessment tool to improve our evaluations, and a study of 173 programs across 65 countries. Today, we are here to share with you the findings from phase 2 of our research. But before we go into that, we have amongst us a very powerful voice and advocate for community-led development. Ambassador Donald Steinberg serves as expert advisor to the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, where he focuses on expanding locally led development, aligning U.S. policies with the SDGs, and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. He also serves as executive director of the nonprofit Mobilizing Men as Partners for Women, Peace, and Security. Under the first Obama term, he was the deputy administrator at USAID, where he prioritized the inclusion of women, people with disabilities, LGBT persons, indigenous populations, and other marginalized groups into the development and humanitarian assistance space. In his illustrious career, Ambassador Steinberg has shaped the course and indeed the discourse in international development and humanitarian sectors in a plethora of roles, including co-chair of the board of the Women's Refugee Commission, fellow at our Secure Future, visiting professor at Dartmouth University, senior advisor to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He has received the Presidential Meritorious Service Award, the Fraser Award for International Peace, a Pulitzer Fellowship, and Distinguished Service Awards from the State Department and USA. Above all of this, the one thing that captures really, our excitement in the movement for having Ambassador Steinberg with us today is something that Administrator Power said during his swearing-in ceremony earlier this year, that Ambassador Steinberg's approach to development is to listen, especially to the people that we don't normally hear from, and to equip them with tools and trainings so that they can solve their own problems and not create dependencies. Ambassador Steinberg, it is an honor to have you with us here today. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Gunjan, and it's only downhill from here, from your kind introduction. And thanks to the members of the Movement for Community-Led Development for hosting us here today, and for your early and steadfast leadership in promoting the principles of localization. As a civil society global initiative comprising more than 1,500 local and international groups across the globe, you've been a thought leader and a partner with USAID as we pursue our own strategies to enhance locally led approaches across our agency. And make no mistake about it, under the leadership of Administrator Powell, USAID is committed to a consistent, purposeful, and comprehensive strategy to provide more direct funding to local actors to change the power dynamics among grassroots organizations and their foreign partners, and to reinforce a local systems approach to development under the watchwords, nothing about them without them. By bringing to bear the full expertise, ground truth, motivated self-interest, and resilience of partner governments, businesses, and civil society, we can enhance the effectiveness of our assistance and also build lasting growth and address legitimate demands for equity and inclusion. I was an early convert to this agenda. As a young Foreign Service officer in the 1970s, I was assigned to help develop a rural health program in the WAM province of the Central African Republic. Traveling to the region, I first met with the provincial governor and the mayor of the capital city, and I asked them how we should spend our $6 million budget. They had dollar signs in their eyes, and they suggested that we build a modern hospital with the latest equipment. This in a region without regular power or trained doctors and nurses. I was lamenting the situation that evening with some Peace Corps volunteer friends, and they suggested that we go to the marketplace the next day to talk to the women traders. And so, sitting under those great baobab trees, these women provided an alternative vision. They said their community was suffering from malaria, schistosomiasis, child stunting, malnutrition, and high infant and maternal mortality. But instead of a fancy hospital, they wanted simple health huts with trained midwives and basic medicines. They wanted us to drill boreholes to provide clean water and then train local citizens how to maintain them. They wanted supplemental feeding programs for pregnant and lactating women and for underweight infants identified through weight monitoring programs. and sustainable fish ponds to provide a regular source of protein for their undernourished children. And that's what we did. Within 2 years, the province was already reporting large declines in infant mortality, maternal mortality, better health outcomes for all demographic groups, and a reduction in extreme poverty and illiteracy, even though we hadn't invested $1 directly in economic growth or education. I was hooked. For 40 years, I've carried with me the lesson that sustainable and resilient development means shifting leadership, ownership, decision-making, and the implementation to the local people and institutions who have the accountability, the connectedness, and the credibility to drive change in their own communities and countries. Building on our past efforts from USAID Forward to the Journey to Self-Reliance, Administrator Power has outlined 4 lines of effort for us. First, as I said originally, we will channel higher percentages of development and humanitarian assistance directly to and through local actors, while at the same time ensuring accountability, high standards of monitoring and evaluation, and the absence of diversion of funds. In addition to our new programs, which we will be announcing soon, this effort will build on the success of existing programs like the New Partnership Initiative, Local Works, cash transfers, greater openness to unsolicited proposals, and simplified procurement, bidding, and eligibility requirements. Equally important, we will help change the power dynamic among donors, international NGOs, development contractors, the United Nations, the World Bank, and local actors. We will ensure that local actors are not only beneficiaries and sub-award implementers of projects, but they will have an empowered voice in planning, designing, and evaluating programs and projects. Through a co-creation strategy, we'll insist that local actors have a seat at the table, and preferably at the head of the table throughout the life of our assistance programs. Third, we will further embrace a local systems approach, recognizing that all development and humanitarian assistance occurs in a unique national context, reflecting the culture, religion, values, history, political and social structures, and power relationships. Drawing on local expertise, we will identify changes that are needed to encourage sustainable growth and poverty eradication in these partner countries, and we will target our interventions on the institutions and individuals who can drive or who currently impede positive change. And finally, Administrator Power wants us to serve as a global public advocate for this approach, like your organization does. USAID will try to serve as a thought leader, an action leader, a learning institution. We will use our convening authority, our partnership capacity, and the power of our example to urge other donors, INGOs, development contractors, international organizations, and yes, other US government agencies to adopt a localization approach. And we will apply these principles of localization not only to our normal development and humanitarian relief, but to our most pressing and toughest global challenges, including COVID response, climate change, democracy and human rights promotion, conflict resolution, anti-corruption, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. For example, we will soon announce the localization initiative to address the root causes of irregular migration in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. In the humanitarian space, affected communities are usually best placed to respond to disasters. USAID continues to support local and national organizations in expanding technical skills in these areas. This includes strategies that enable particularly vulnerable groups in a given disaster context, including children, adolescents, women, LGBTQI+ populations, and people with disabilities, to create and lead approaches to ensure their own safety. I can't conclude my comments without acknowledging the challenges to adopting such an approach, as reflected in the mixed results we've had over the past decade. Localization will test the agency's adaptability and its capacity for change in policies, practices, culture, regulation, and laws. It raises questions about our risk posture, the speed of disbursement, the size of pipelines, the proper role for our implementing partners in the NGO and development contracting world, and the need for greater staffing, especially related to contracting and evaluation. And that staff needs to be trained in new skills. As in the past, our ability to address these challenges depends heavily on the input, advocacy, encouragement, and engagement of you, our local partners, and particularly the members of the MCLD. Around the world, you are known as the eyes, the ears, and the conscience of our global community. And just as you're being so generous and forthcoming in sharing your knowledge, data, and experience here today as part of the collaborative research we'll unpack, we ask you to continue partnering with us as we refine our localization efforts. Finally, we hope that you will call us out if we do not adopt the model of principled inclusion and local ownership as we proceed to develop, implement, and evaluate this program itself. Congratulations again to the research teams and to the MCLD members for this milestone in evidence on locally led approaches. I'm excited to hear about the call to action. We will look forward to our continued partnership in the next phase of research, in refining localization agendas, and in supporting communities to lead. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Steinberg, for this very powerful and inspiring words. All of us in the movement know that we have a friend and a champion in you and an administrator power on localization and community-led development. And don't worry, we will be here every step of the way to partner, to support, and as you said, to do a little bit of course correction if we don't see things happening the way they should be happening. Thank you for your inspiration and for sharing time with us. I know that when we first approached you, your big incentive and reason for being here with us today was to speak directly to the local partners, to the local civil society organizations from all over the world. And I assure you that we are making sure that your voice will be carried to them. And we will make sure that their voice is carried back to you. Thank you.
I look forward to hearing more from the local partners. And if there are comments people have, please put them in the chats and I will try to respond.
Okay, sure. We can then open up the chat if you would like. Sure, we will do that. Thank you so much, Ambassador Steinberg. We appreciate that. Anna, maybe we can open up the chat then. And in the meantime, now it is my pleasure to introduce you to some members from our research team who will share with us the results of this study and the key findings from there. We have with us today Professor Jill Westorp from Charles Darwin University, Australia, who was the chief investigator for the study. From MCLD, we have Holta Trandafulli from World Vision, Matthew Cruz from Relief International, Aline Kluter from Outreach International, and Molly Wright from PACT. Holta, over to you. And can we please get the slide deck up, Deanna? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Gunjan shared with us that there were 2 phases of the research, and in phase 1 we looked more at what does the landscape of CLD look like, and what are the organization doing when they say that they are doing CLD. In phase 2, we looked at CLD impact. The Ideal Small Grants Program funded a project of this phase, which is called Impact of Community-Led Development on Food Security, or short INCLUDE, which started in September 2020 in partnership with Charles Darwin University in Australia, world-renowned for its realist approaches. Ideal supported first the dissemination of our phase 1 tools and report in a massive launching event in January 2021. Today, they are supporting sharing learning from this rapid realist review from INCLUDE. But before we get into the rapid realist review, we have some success stories to report. So maybe next slide. As the slide keeps coming up, right now I see, okay, there we go. The developed phase 1 tools are presently widely used, downloaded in 70+ countries, and we hope that in phase 3, we will track their use as we examine if our CLD practice is indeed changing from the interaction with such tools, and as CLD discussions come to the forefront of programs. For now, the movement has introduced 4-hour certificate courses on the CLD assessment tool based on the demand among and beyond our members. We have conducted trainings in English and French in numerous countries, and soon we'll start in Spanish. To learn more about the tools or participate in the training, register on the MCLD website, and the tools are for free. Next slide. But let's come back to the rapid realist review that we are gathered to learn here today what we found. First of all, what is the rapid realist review? A realist review is a type of systematic review focusing on how outcomes are created and why they vary across contexts for families of programs rather than discrete interventions. A rapid realist review, just by its name, it's a shortened form of realist review with a specific focus and particular purpose, which is to understand how and why things work when they do, why they don't when they don't, and what features of context affect whether or not they do. One question for the study was how and in what context do key aspects of CLD, particularly leadership and facilitation, contribute to resilience and equity in relation to food security? We chose facilitation and community leadership because in our phase 1 research, these were identified as foundational to CLD work. In this study, we reviewed 117 documents representing 56 programs, 93 of them coming from MCLD members, 24 from the Legacy Food for Peace. As per realist review protocol, we created an expert and a reference group of practitioners as soundboard for the study and to ensure that the final conceptual model reflected ground realities. We produced a final report and 2 guidance documents for funders and implementing organizations, which will be available in English and French. As we transition to the methodology and findings, let's first show you the faces of the multi-organizational research team and our reference and expert group members from all over the world, including USAID professionals. Jill, I'm passing this over to you now.
Thanks very much, Holta. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk you through very briefly the methods, our methodology in 9 steps. Of course, we began by identifying the review question. As we mentioned earlier, this was done based on the findings from the phase 1 research and the funding application guidelines. The next step was to use literature to define some of the key terms like facilitation, community-led development, leadership, equity, and so on. And we developed an initial rough theory about how facilitation and community leadership may lead to increased equity, resilience, and food security outcomes. Step 3 was looking for the primary studies, and we used the studies provided by MCLD members for the research and the Legacy Food for Peace evaluations from the Development Experience, Clearinghouse. You then go through an inclusion and exclusion process. Our criteria included key terms and prioritised rich qualitative data. It focused on programs, not on reports. And quality appraisal for the documentation was carried out as part of the data extraction. Data extraction was carried out by all team members, and the synthesis was undertaken using MaxQDA software. And that was then turned into the first draft of the report, a huge task for which we owe thanks to Cara Donoghue and Ruth Nichols, 2 members of the research team. We then conducted a workshop with select participants to understand the implications of our findings and the key recommendations arising from it. And those resulted in a revised report and the guidance documents. Next slide, please. Before we look at the findings, we did want to highlight how one should interpret findings from a realist review. In a realist review, the data is extracted to test a theory, not to amalgamate the findings. We're not looking for an effect size of 7%. As a result, the findings show how CLD can work, not how it always works, and definitely not how it works on average. The findings also provide evidence about the conditions in which CLD is more likely and less likely to be effective. It's also important to remember that a combination of causes and a combination of contextual factors will be required for any outcome to be achieved. The presence or absence of a single factor very rarely accounts for change. Next slide, please. There are also some limitations to the research that we need to keep in mind while we're looking at the findings. Firstly, there was a very broad range of programs that were described as community-led development, and yet there were very limited descriptions of how CLD was done, of what facilitation and leadership looked like. Often, multiple different terms were used to describe the same function. For example, mobiliser, animator, facilitator, volunteer, or the same term was used to describe different functions. For example, facilitator was used to describe many roles, including roles which were purely training or organisational. They weren't about facilitation at the local level. As a result of all this, it was very difficult to distinguish what constituted community leadership and facilitation in the programs, or to distinguish between facilitation and leadership. We're also limited by the nature of evaluation reports and the fact that few reports described the contexts and factors that affected the programs and how they worked. So I'll now pass to Aline to talk about definitions.
Thanks, Joel. Thank you so much. As Joel shared, one of the first steps in the method is to develop key definitions. And here on the slide, you see 3 of those key ones. The first, community development, a development approach where local community members work together to identify goals important to them, develop and implement plans to achieve those goals, and then create collaborative relationships internally and with external actors, all while building on community strengths and local leadership. Then facilitation, defined as follows: a co-creative and adaptive process in which a facilitator enables local actors to set common goals, take ownership of these goals, build on existing strengths, and work toward achieving their goals. And then lastly, community leadership, defined as or can refer to either a type of leadership by an individual from a given community or to a process by which a community exercises collective leadership at a grassroots level. Next slide, please. So what did we find? We have grouped our findings under 12 key themes listed here. And because we don't have time to delve into all of them, I'm going to quickly give you an overview of these here, and then we will delve into 3 to 4 findings before we move on to recommendations. The important thing to remember here is that all the findings refer to the literature reviewed. And as Joel mentioned earlier, it shows how CLD can work, not how it always works. Our number one finding, and no surprise there, was that context matters. We were able to identify environments that enable and limit community-led development. For example, presence of local community-based organizations and supportive governments are enablers. We will delve more into this in the subsequent slides. Second, much of our current work, at least as described in the reports, falls short of CLD practice. In this study, we were able to identify 7 types of CLD activities, but only 20% of the programs, and that is 11 programs, included collective or group leadership, where needs identification and goal setting were done by the community or community groups. There was a high level of dialogue and collaboration, and projects were initiated and completed by community members. So only 20% of the programs had that. Third, we have been saying this for a while, but the study generated evidence to show that facilitation and leadership needs explicit attention and resourcing. Training, ongoing support, remuneration, and recognition are important for facilitators. The fourth finding came out in phase 1 of our study as well, and that is that programming duration matters. Generally speaking, longer is better, but we need to be careful about creating dependency. 5 forms of social capital are necessary for CLD in food security. At the same time, we did find evidence that CLD can contribute to resilience by building human and social capital. On the equity front, as we saw with phase 1 as well, there remains work to be done. And we will delve more into what this means in the following slides. Then we found evidence that multi-sectoral approaches contribute to food security, formalized structures support CLD, and that structured advocacy processes increase communities' power, as well as make governments more receptive to their demands. Finally, the sector really needs clearer terminology, program theory, and stronger evaluations. We need to rethink as a community the way we evaluate our work. Next slide, please, Diana. Let's now look very briefly into a few select findings. As we saw earlier, local CBDs, and supportive government enable CLD. On the other hand, low access to resources, low social capital, and high barriers to participation limit CLD. Next slide, please. So here's a more detailed look at what enables CLD and how. To make sense of this diagram, you have to read across the arrows. So for example, the first one is where there is supportive, effective, and transparent policy and legal environments, there is more likely to be strong local government support, which then contributes to effective CLD and CLD outcomes. The right-hand box is a summary statement of the overall realist theory arising from this slide. So drawing on existing capitals contributes to trust, perceived legitimacy, and resources to enable effective implementation, which then contributes to participation and the achievement of outcomes. This then builds further motivation and stock of capitals, which with appropriate leadership are reinvested in CLD. The C, the M, and the O that you see here in parentheses, that refers to context, mechanisms, and outcomes. Next slide, please. On the flip side, when there's poor infrastructure, poor local government support, and not sufficient or enough qualified personnel, there's a low state capacity, and it reduces access to resources and therefore the capacity to do CLD. And I'm going to give a little bit of a moment there for you just to throw your eye across those unsupportive context and conditions. Okay, and then I'm going to pass it on to you, Matt.
Great. Next slide, please. So for key finding 4 regarding program design and implementation, we found that while quick wins can improve community motivation because you can see fast, immediate results and people are initially inspired to continue to participate, these activities were not seen to be sustainable. We also saw that short-term programs are less likely to contribute to attitudinal shifts and behavioral shifts, and that locations that are far away from the center of the programmatic activity benefit less from implementation. So what we found is collaboration with local CBOs, other local NGOs, and government entities were seen to be effective in sustainability, but it does require investment. We also saw evidence to suggest that projects that build and focus on human and social capital, so we're looking at capacity building, empowerment programming, social capital cohesion programs, self-help groups, these were much more likely to lead to community-led and collective outcomes than infrastructure projects. But we still need to dig a bit deeper into this. Next slide. So another important finding is that we need to build equity within our CLD work. So even though a lot of our programs mention marginalized populations, most often we focus and we found reporting and evidence only with respect to women and youth. And even within that, we found that the majority treated women and youth as a homogeneous group, which we all know is not true. There are many subpopulations within those categories. So this is something that we've seen in our broader study. And part of it is just how we need to do CLD and how it relies on investments and time and resources from and with communities. And that's striking because the most vulnerable within these already vulnerable groups are often the most time and resource poor. So what the review revealed was that the ongoing barriers to participation included illiteracy, cultural barriers, teenage pregnancy, and migration, just to name some of the larger ones. On the flip side, positively, where laws and policies were supportive, where gender equity was already being actively pursued, and where skilled facilitation challenged this existing gender inequality, women in particular were seen to develop greater confidence and voice and were more included in decision making. Next slide. So here's an example of an example program theory regarding increased equity for women. So women can further develop confidence and voice, and women's voices are included in decision making. Women develop a wider range of roles, both at home and in the community, including increased capacity to earn and to also control and decide income and spending. So this generally happens where laws and policies, again, require equitable inclusion, capacity development on these laws and policies with both men and women, and where women undergo capacity strengthening to participate in group activities that they've been traditionally excluded from. And then again, where there's skilled facilitation to challenge power inequities. However, this will not happen where gender equity is seen as an imposed norm from outside, and where cultural norms preclude or exclude women from speaking in front of men, and especially where marginalized women with who are already marginalized are not included in the conversation. Next slide, please. So we already know that there are existing social and other forms of capital, and it can be and it has been seen as an enabling condition for CLD. But the review revealed that CLD can increase resilience by developing capacities, social capital, and social cohesion, and developing a self-reliance mindset, as the ambassador noted. So let's see what this means, and we'll go through two more examples. So an example of self-reliance. So there is a mindset shift. Community-led collective action and common goals increase collective efficacy, a passion for change, and continuous learning. This can then lead to an increase in self-reliance. And local leaders must be there to catalyze and to continue community participation. This happens where organizations follow a strengths-based approach, where the group structures are inclusive, they're not captured by elite or select groups of people, and that there is an existing solidarity and social capital already on the ground that can enable and improve the process. The limiting factors to this, of course, are corruption, again, captured by elite organizations or groups within the community, inequitable participation, and failure of implementation. Next slide. So lastly, let's look at an example for social cohesion. We found evidence that collaboration on a common cause and or on common spaces for positive interaction leads to bonding, bridging, and improved linkages within and linking social capital with each other. This increased capital and social cohesion, it increases access to resources and support, which increases community resilience. However, this is again limited in contexts where there is social pressure of people to participate out of a fear of retribution. The outcomes are less likely to be sustained. The increase in resilience is also limited by exclusion and inaccessibility resulting from distance to program implementation or sustained poverty. And so with those examples, I will turn it back to Jill for further findings.
Try that again after unmuting. We're going to turn now to the findings for food security. And in the first stage, we found that there was a clear indication that multi-sectoral approaches can contribute to food security outcomes, and that functional literacy components of those approaches could contribute to those outcomes. We also found that programs that demonstrated food security outcomes also had evidence of equity and intermediate resilience outcomes, suggesting that the three are connected. All of the programs that showed that used multi-sectoral approaches. Next slide, please. And here's the example program theory for that. In the middle box, increased knowledge and skills in agriculture, together with social and conflict resolution skills that were required to resolve land-related conflicts, contributed to agricultural productivity. And collective action enabled access to food during lean times. Capacity development in agriculture and in agriculture and in collective action and conflict resolution training all contributed to those outcomes. But a couple of factors that can limit this increase in agricultural productivity were if there's no direct assistance to address immediate food shortage, particularly during drought, and where local trainers didn't have the range of skills required to solve agricultural productivity problems, then those benefits didn't eventuate. Next slide, please. We also found that in communities where there are high levels of bonding capital and where there are collective assets and structures like savings groups, the higher level of access to resources resulting from CLD contributes to resilience. Collective action enables access to resources, learning from peers and personal support, which creates confidence and the capacity to recover from shocks. The evidence actually wasn't there in the reports that we looked at to work out what context would prevent that. Next slide, please. We're going to share two more examples here. First of all, increased knowledge and skills combined with improved economic capacity contributed to better family nutrition. This was enabled where the program provided capacity development for mothers in health, nutrition, life skills, savings and income generation activities, rather than focusing on just health or just economic development. But the limiting circumstance here was a heavy reliance on women as volunteers. This could demotivate the female group leaders, and it also reduced opportunities for other income generating activities by them, and thus undermined women's economic empowerment. Next slide, please. We also found evidence that increased knowledge and skills combined with access to resources could improve women's agricultural productivity, which in turn contributed to household nutrition. However, this was undermined by illiteracy and was more limited for the poorest households. And at that point, I'll hand on.
Okay, this is my finding to share. We found evidence that formalized structures support CLD and that structured advocacy processes enhance the power of community members. Formalized groups means groups with elected members and executives, a constitution or something similar, and a clearly defined purpose and rules. They can be structured to ensure an inclusive, transparent, accountable process. At the same time, they create legitimacy and tend to be viewed more positively by authority holders and are more likely to be listened and engaged. However, we found that when it comes to formalized structures, there are barriers to participation, especially Jill just mentioned the illiteracy, meaning members in such structures could not undertake the required administrative work. But there was also high volume turnover. Can you go to the next slide? Here is your final program theory walkthrough. In theory, formalized structures enable governance of community-led development, processes for consultation with broader community, official engagement with and/or advocacy to local government and external bodies, and transparency and accountability to the wider community. We also typically theorize that formalized groups are more likely to be viewed positively by authority holders. This happens where the group members are elected by communities, not imposed from outside. There is a clarity on roles and procedures, and where timely advice and support is available to the members. This does not work as it should when formalized structures suffer volunteer turnover or members, again, like have low literacy levels. And Molly, I think you can take it over back to the summary.
Great, thank you, Hulda. So having seen the findings, let's now take a quick look at what they might mean for all of us in practice. Based on our research, the MCLD produced 2 guidance documents, one for funders and one for implementing organizations. And here I'll highlight just a couple of those key recommendations. So our first recommendation, which should come as no surprise if you've been following our collaborative research, is that we think we need to rethink how we do evaluations. The evaluation purpose and methods should be negotiated not just between funders and implementing organizations, but with communities themselves. And if CLD is truly about equity and inclusion, then we must not only disaggregate by gender, but also measure with a broader lens of inclusion. Further, evaluations for CLD programs need to themselves be congruent with the principles of CLD and be conducted along a clearly outlined program theory. This means intentionally and systematically evaluating our programs in terms of the defined characteristics of CLD, and the quality appraisal tool developed by the movement offers a starting point to do this. Second, we need to change the way we practice CLD, which starts with the way requests for proposals are issued as well as how we respond to them. So both RFPs and our responses should clearly specify what we mean when we use terms like sustainability, resilience, equity, and community leadership. Further, they should more clearly articulate our theories of change and explain exactly how our programs are community-led. We also recommend funders consider a preparatory grants phase for conducting a political and social context analysis. Third, we heard how formalization of CLD structures strengthens CLD, so our grants and our programs need to actively plan for and build this into our work. But again, we have to be careful that we are not imposing these structures, and instead they are created by the community and are inclusive. Next, where the context allows, CLD programs should work with local governments in order to align objectives. We should include them in trainings and create forums for government functionaries to interact with community members. And number 5, as participation, inclusion, and equity are really the foundational principles of CLD, we need to ensure that our programs operate in a manner that allows the most marginalized groups in society to be parts of these programs. We know that it's important that their voices are part of the decision-making process, but what does this truly mean? And how do we mitigate the additional burden this might place on them? So we need to redesign our programs to ensure that we do not place unequal burdens on women and other marginalized groups within their context. And finally, the evidence points to the critical role of skilled facilitators in successful CLD. It also then points to the need for ensuring appropriate workloads, remuneration, training, and ongoing support for these facilitators. Next slide, please. Okay, so to learn more about this research, you can reach out to Gunjan Vida or visit the MCLD website where you can download the guidance documents in both English and in French. Over to you, Gunjan.
Thank you so much to the research team. I know it was very difficult to capture in a few minutes everything that we did over the course of the last year, but thank you for that comprehensive summary. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to the person who really seeded the idea behind this research. Susan Wong is the global lead for community-driven development and for sustainability and standards at the World Bank. Her specialties are in the areas of CDD and local governance, social risk management, monitoring and evaluation, and operations. More importantly, she has been a friend of the movement since its inception. And in 2018, it was Susan who said to us, well, you all do the CLD programming all over the world. Have you ever looked at your evaluation reports to really begin to unpack the impact? And that's where we started off. Susan, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much, everybody. And first of all, thank you very much to John and Gunjan for inviting me to speak at this exciting event today. I mean, little did I know 2 years ago when I met with John and then Gunjan for an informal coffee, they take me seriously, and it's kind of scary that they did to launch this exciting program of learning. But I'm glad they did take me seriously over a formal chat. We'll have to have more coffees in the future as more ideas will be sparked that way. Let me first start by saying that it was really inspiring to hear from Ambassador Steinberg, his personal commitment to the localization and community-led work. USAID has obviously been a leader in international development, and we here at the World Bank really look forward to continuing to partner with the US government in all these efforts. Let me also congratulate Gunjan, John, Hota, Jill, Elaine, Matt, Holly, and the entire research team for their impressive work. I looked through the research this week. It was really exciting, really a lot of threads to pull later on. This work could not have come at a better time, I think, when we in the international development community need to really multiply our efforts to tackle climate change, the COVID pandemic, growing forced displacement, and other challenges in achieving green, resilient, and inclusive development. So really, we should ask ourselves now, is it really business as usual moving forward? Or do we charter a new path going ahead? And whichever path we choose, I think we strongly believe that putting people and communities at the center is vital for more sustainable, inclusive development. So the World Bank is a major funder of community-led development operations, or what we refer to as community-driven development programs. I'm pleased to say that the current active portfolio of CDD operations supported by the World Bank is growing annually. It's composed of about 374 projects in 93 countries around the world, and it's valued at approximately $42 billion in bank financing. 2/3 of those projects are in the poorest countries of the world, and the vast majority work in fragile and conflict countries or conflict context. So we view the CDD approach as a holistic partnership between governments, communities, NGOs, such as those online, and in many cases, we're working together with the private sector. And these programs work with many of you in the international and local NGO community and tend to scale up very quickly, given the right enabling environment, and they are able to assist billions of poor and vulnerable people around the world. So let me just turn now to the research that was presented today. And let me start by saying that there's a lot to like about this research. I was fascinated reading through the different recommendations and the findings. So first, as someone who has managed all kinds of community-led development evaluations, be they randomized controlled trials, quasi-experimental, or other methodologies, it was really useful to see a body of work that focuses on unpacking the how, the why, and under what context do key aspects of CLD contribute to resilience and equity in relation to food security. And I think this realist view, which I really liked, in effect road tests certain hypotheses and examines more carefully the processes that lead to outcomes. So if many of you who work in this evaluation world, oftentimes we get quantitative evaluations from RCTs or quasi-experimental, and they tell you what happened, but they don't really tell you how we got there. What was the path that people followed to get the results, either positive or negative? So I think the methodology that this research used was really informative and a really nice complement to other methodologies that we use as well for evaluations. And this approach is valuable for several reasons. So working in international development, as many of you online do, we are constantly reminded of the complexity of the world out there and the unexpected, especially in fragile and conflict contexts, where even the best laid plans and logical theories of change are severely tested. And I've been thinking a lot about this past year in the countries that I work in. And what is that saying I'm constantly reminded of? No plan survives first contact with the enemy. And what matters is how quickly leaders adapt. And I think how true is that in the international development world and how relevant to today's discussion. I myself have worked close to 17 years in Afghanistan and the largest community-led development operation there, investing in poor communities and women's groups all over the country. And what I took away from the last few months there is that no one I know would have predicted what happened on August 15th. Maybe later, but not so soon. So how does one plan for the unexpected, or in fact, evaluate the how, why, and where in contexts like that? And furthermore, what is called best practice in some country contexts may not necessarily work in other settings. So a lot of the real learning happens in unpacking how we get from here to there and the processes as to how we get to the outcomes we are seeking. So I think that's what the research team has tried to do with this body of work. I agree with all 12 findings and the recommendations. I think they have resonance, and I've seen snapshots of these findings in World Bank supported operations as well. For example, the partnership with national and local governments is critical for CLD interventions to succeed. The importance of investing in grassroots leadership and facilitation to strengthen social capital and social resilience is just as important for sustainable development as building a road or providing clean water. Also, in a world of sectoral silos, we found that the multi-sectoral approaches are even more important to reducing poverty and contributing to food security outcomes. So as Ambassador was mentioning, better nutrition and tackling stunting, they require not just health interventions, but also improved access to clean water and sanitation, to education, and to broad community support. I would say the same is true of tackling the COVID crisis we're all experiencing now. It requires a whole of society, multi-sectoral approach. Lastly, if I had one suggestion on the research, I would have liked to see a bit more just on your findings about the food security outcomes and what has been achieved on that front. So did these CLD interventions in whatever shape and form lead to improved resilience and equity in relation to food security? So CLD is both a means and an end, and a little more information on what CLD aspects led to greater food security would be extremely helpful and I think educational for all of us. So let me conclude by again congratulating the CLD researchers for shining a bright spotlight on these issues. And I think now more than ever, we owe it to the broader international development community to understand better what are the drivers of transformative change and under what circumstances. So thank you very much and happy to respond to any questions you may have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susan. We definitely need to have more coffees. They are very productive. It seems. And thank you, everyone. Continue to put your questions in chat for our speakers, for the respondent, for the research team. We will try and take them up. I see Ambassador Steinberg and research team members are already responding to them. But now we move to the next portion of our plenary, which is the call to action. And we have three powerful voices here today to issue the call to action. We will start with Tim Pruitt, the CEO and president of the Hunger Project. Then we will go to Mrs. Zippy, who is the Director of Public Participation and Citizen Engagement for Makueni County, Kenya. And finally, we will hear from Carrie Hessler-Radelet, who is the President of Global Communities. Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gunjan, and a special thank you to everyone here for joining today. It's such an honor to be with you and really just terrific to see the outcome. When we started this so many years ago, we never expected how many people would come forth in the movement, and really to see everyone here coming out is just terrific. If you can hang on one second, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties. Bear with me.
You're good.
I'm
and
sorry,
clear, Tim.
can we go to another speaker and then I'll circle back? I'm having a little technical difficulties on my side.
Absolutely, no worries. It was
Thanks
bound
for
to
your help.
happen. Every call needs to,
Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim. Zippy, can we move over to you first?
Yes, thank you, everybody. I am so delighted to be part of this discussion and especially on the element of the action areas. I am excited because here in Makueni County, since we joined the movement of community-led development in 2019, as a subnational in Kenya, we can tell the story. We are able to learn and we are able to see what is happening, and joining this platform for the movement of community-led development has been an area of helping us learn more, gain new knowledge, and continue strengthening the movement at the subnational level. I'll be speaking specifically on the role of governments and informed by the experience of Makueni County, a little county among the 47 counties of Kenya, and anticipating to see all the 47 counties of Kenya go this direction. The reason is because we are convinced beyond doubt that the new Constitution of Kenya 2010 providing for devolution, and not just devolution structurally in terms of administrative units, but also fiscal decentralization, as well as devolution of powers to communities to be able to manage their own development. That is very clear in the Constitution of Kenya. And it is in that basis that we are
My apologies, Lippy. We lost your sound a little bit. Can you close it to the...
So can you hear me?
Yes, now we.
Thank you. So it is on the basis of the Constitution of Kenya that we are persuaded that community-led development is the way to go. And I'll be able to share some of the action areas from the government perspective. One is that it is about not just community-led development, but it is about sustainable community-led development. It means that we need continuous technical leadership, support in terms of government support to the communities, providing technical assistance, continuous animation of the CLD model, continuous modeling and coaching of communities, and overall oversight of the communities as they undertake community-led development. Point number two is that CLD requires formalized structures, and that has been very clear in the research. We are torn between two things. The local communities, CLD is empowering the local communities, and also are already organized communities in terms of civil society. The government stands at the right footing in terms of leveraging the power. Whose power is it? Is it empowering the local community? Is it empowering the old, all around briefcase civil society that has been here and that has been used to writing good proposals and getting funding? And there's that element of leveraging, and through formal structures that are perpetual in nature, which can be oversighted, supported by the county governments and subnationals across the globe, would be an area of action that would deepen the participation and the community action implementation strategies. Number three is that governments exist to create suitable environment in terms of policy, in terms of legislation. One of the speakers spoke about simplified procurement. In Kenya right now, the current procurement law has now, 2020 has now provided for community-based procurement methodologies. And this is the way to go, and giving government opportunities to backstop these communities, to backstop these community-based organizations, and provide the support that is required. Here is where the rubber meets the road. Co-creation, the ability for the public servants to experience the mindset change and understand, articulate that there is delegated power to community, and therefore that delegated power requires to be provided. Therefore, it requires on the government side the unlearning and the understanding that community members also have a role and they are the sole drivers of their development. Meaning, therefore, governments have to unlearn the historical technical approach of service delivery. So that the concern is mentorship, coaching, and animating the community-led development models among the community, and hence, on the other hand, advance the networking between both government and community so that there is a healthy relationship. The other area of action is the area of capacity building and development. Communities, especially the global south, literacy levels are a challenge. Devolution literacy or development literacy is a challenge. Government plays a key role and can play a key role in terms of capacity building of these communities. Currently in Makueni County, we are envisioning the establishment of the county school of community-led development. The passion here is to ensure standardization of the curriculums, and that is why we did an MOU with the movement of community-led development to ensure it's a standardized curriculum on community-led development that can perpetually be trained communities year in, year out until the model, until monitoring and evaluation mechanisms for CLD and so forth capacities are generated, and there's learning between the various communities and the initiatives they are doing with other emerging communities within the global scene. Else also is the question of knowledge management, which we are keen, and it's an area that the county government is also pushing within the School of Community-Led Development to ensure that there is knowledge management. Other of the 46 counties of Kenya can find opportunities to come and study, to come and link the theory within the school and also the practice among communities. This year alone, we have been able to provide small grants to communities that are performing better in the community-led development interventions. One of the key things is the understanding of what Mahatma Gandhi said many years ago, when he said, it is until every village becomes a republic, independent of its neighbors, for its own vital ones, that it has its own roads, it can provide its own water, it can develop its own crops and has food sovereignty. There can be playgrounds for the children by the people and for the people. It is until that period of time when our villages become own republics that are governed by the people themselves. And that is the motto here in Makueni County, that we stand strategically to midwife, to capacity build, and to model the CLD model in a manner that our communities are able to catch up, are able to drive the agenda on their own. And lastly, therefore, is that we have a responsibility. Government has a responsibility in terms of policy, in terms of capacity, in terms of mediating even conflicts among communities and disagreements among communities, and even to facilitate communities in setting up their priorities. Here in Makueni County, we have integrated what we call community action planning. That is an area that governments, national and subnational, should be able to be at the frontier in assisting communities to develop, to come up with the visions, to come up with objectives and locally owned visions that help them model the future that they desire and slowly begin to work towards the objectives of meeting the future that they desire. And lastly, therefore, is that local governments should be advocates of the model. It is until governments begin to unlearn and begin to agree that this is the way to go, that they begin to be advocates of this publicly. When governments admit publicly, like Makueni County has done, then it begins being a creative idea. It begins being an idea integrated within the local context. And that means when governments are committed and they're advocating, it also means that they are able to even provide the grants that are required. They are able to monitor, they are able to assist the communities where necessary. We have been able to learn from various governments across the globe, which has informed the Makueni model. And one is the Panchayat Raj in India. And the other is the Community Development Committees of South Africa. And the other is the participatory budgeting in Port Allegro. giving and delegating powers to communities is the thing. The policies, government legislations should demonstrate the delegation, and the delegation should be midwifed until it is successful. The current procurement law in Kenya is a big example, and we are excited to see what can happen. I therefore urge that in this movement, we begin to dream about the role of the governments. Governments are important in the MCLD. The sustainability of MCLD is even in creating the portion for governments to be able to demonstrate the animation among the communities and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zippy, for your inspiring words and highlighting the importance of governments joining the movement. Tim, can we move over to you? And apologies, everyone. I know we are running behind time, but I'm sure you know how rich the content of our discussions have been and would not mind staying back with us for a few minutes longer. Thank you for your patience. Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Gunjan, and thanks everyone for patience. And Zippy, thanks for stepping in with your beautiful, inspiring words there, calling for more village republics. And a very special thank you also to our IDEAL Consortium and to USAID for believing in the work and for joining together in shared strength. As we heard from Susan and Ambassador Steinberg, it's really an exciting time for community-led development. And its time has come. I don't need to tell this group that community-led development is a powerful concept. At its core, it's the belief that communities themselves should be in charge of their lives and that communities hold the power for transformative change. Building back better starts with communities. The time is now with our current challenges. There's a moral imperative to do as much as we can to shift leadership, resources, and authority to where it's needed most. Now, at the Hunger Project, we hold a long-standing commitment to this shift. Many of you know that we made an earlier call to action to form the movement for community-led development. And along with that original vision, we aligned our own work to greater community inclusion and ownership. We're in the processing of amplifying this shift once again with our upcoming 5-year strategy and continued secretarial support to the movement. And the movement is where we come together to endorse the idea, to advance it, to help others see what we see. And today, we are all here to call for action once again. 2 ways to take action are to encourage others to join the movement, of course, including joining national chapters, and also to use these research findings to have an even greater impact on our world. Now, the findings are significant. With this phase of the movement research, we go from examining the practice of community-led development to understanding what is needed to make the greatest impact. I'm personally excited about the ways to improve design, implementation, and evaluation in food security, and echo Susan's call for more research there. As you heard, this research also highlights a point about women's equity, which deserves special mention. We must ensure that community-led development activities are not adding to the burdens of rural women, and instead that community-led development remains a force of good for all, and especially women. There's more in the findings, much more, as you know, and I really encourage you all to explore the detail, find what's most meaningful for you. And once you do, please don't be quiet about it. Spread the news, encourage others to join in. Community-led development has such potential impact to make, and we need all of you to expand this further, this simple and powerful ideal. Thanks for being here with us today. Let's take action. Ultimately, for the ideal we're all working towards, communities in charge of their own development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. And as Tim said, let's not be quiet about community-led development. Carrie, over to you.
Thank you so much. What an incredible event. And I really want to thank the MCLD team for bringing us all together. And really a special thanks to our extraordinary speakers. We have heard from Ambassador Steinberg and Dr. Wong about how locally led development is a core priority of USAID and World Bank, and how prominently they will feature in future partnership opportunities with these large development funders. I know I'm taking special note of that. They spoke of the importance of designing programs in consultation with communities guided by their ideas and perspectives. And they spoke about the importance of changing power dynamics and how local actors must not just have a seat at the table, but rather sit at the head of the table. They talked about the importance of taking a systems approach that reflects the context of the work, and that will enable the importance of equipping leaders, especially local leaders, with the evidence that will support their leadership and give them the skills to leading rapidly evolving multi-sectoral initiatives that will lead to real change. Both of those leaders have made bold commitments to prioritizing and promoting community-led development, recognizing its importance as a scalable approach for communities to chart their own pathways towards resilience and ensure the sustainability of their development outcomes. And from our fantastic research team, you've heard the evidence regarding how and in what context key aspects of community-led development, particularly leadership and facilitation, can contribute to resilience and equity in relation to food security. And you have heard how under IDEAL include sought to strengthen our capacity, members of the Movement for Community-Led Development and other partners, to improve the design, implementation, evaluation, and effectiveness of food and nutrition security tools and activities. Their research yielded powerful recommendations to guide our action in the future. And today we have heard powerful calls for greater understanding of the evidence related to the practice of CLD for improving program design and sustainable results. We are really grateful for the strong recommendations issued by the research team and look forward to testing them further in phase 3. And from Zippy, I loved what you had to say. We've heard how CLD is leveraging the power of local communities through formal structures that are perpetual in nature, and how partnership, especially with local government, is critical to the sustainability of CLD initiatives. She spoke of the importance of changing procurement practices and the importance of co-creation and really truly implementing power shifts that will give community members a leading role in defining their own future, supported by strong local and national government. And Zippy, you spoke so powerfully about the importance of local capacity strengthening to ensure CLD learning in the future. Tim, we thank you for your leadership of the Hunger Project and your commitment to CLD and elevating the practice of this approach through evidence and collective action. Building Back Better truly starts with local communities, shifting power and resources to those closest to the issues we seek to address. So in terms of a call to action, I want to echo Tim. We need more people to join this movement. If your organization is not actively engaged in locally led development, we invite you to join us. Join your local chapters of MCLD. Spread the word to others as well. Ambassador Steinberg emphasized the importance of our voice and our advocacy in supporting and improving USAID's commitment to expanding locally led development throughout USAID's both development and humanitarian programs. And you heard from Dr. Wong about how we must put communities at the center of our work if we are to effectively address the challenges of our time. So please, we ask you to continue to support MCLD as we look forward to phase 3 of the research, where we will focus on developing participatory tools that are congruent with the complexity of CLD and will enable us to capture its impact on outcomes like citizen engagement and resilience. We encourage you to use the research results to strengthen your own work. Stay in touch, share your thoughts and ideas and evidence. We want you to be part of this dynamic and exciting movement going forward. Community-led development honors the power, promise, and potential that exists within every community. It is committed to ensuring that communities are in charge of their own future. It recognizes the inherent wisdom within communities and works with local culture and context to create collaborative relationships that build on and honor the inherent wisdom within communities. It understands the importance of local context, the complexity and difficulty of CLD practice, and the need for explicit attention to and resourcing of facilitation and leadership over a prolonged period of time as a way to sustain CLD. And it champions the engagement of women and other marginalized groups in ways that do not burden them. As we close, let's return to Ambassador Steinberg's powerful rallying cry of nothing about them without them. I can't think of a better mantra as we further commit ourselves to the work ahead. So let us all collectively and collaboratively work towards that goal as we continue to learn from each other through MCLD. So with that, over to you, Brian. I think you're closing up.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for your very powerful word and for that beautiful summary, actually, of Ambassador Steinberg's remarks, and for inspiring all of us. And now I would like to invite Brian Hunter, who's the Associate Vice President, Save the Children, for the Department of Hunger and Livelihoods, that the IDEAL grant actually sits. Brian, over to you.
Great, thanks, Gunjan. Thanks, everybody. I'm humbled and honored to issue the close of the event, which with so many esteemed colleagues from around the world. Today, I'm coming to you wearing multiple hats. First, standing as a representative of the IDEAL activity, which funded the study. And second, as a representative of Save the Children, which is a proud member of the movement for community-led development. And then finally, as someone who cares deeply about issues of food security and community-led development, I'm very pleased that we supported this research and that looks at the pathways for change created by our programs and the context within which they have an impact and contexts where perhaps they do not. And I must say, out of many things that Zippy has said today, the one concept that she said was unlearning. She said that the government has to unlearn. I think we all have to unlearn as well, and that's our role also in coming together through this movement is being willing to unlearn as well. About the IDEAL program, the implementer-led design, evidence analysis, and learning activity. It is funded by the USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. We work to support the US government's goal of improving food and nutrition security amongst the world's most vulnerable households and communities. IDEAL addresses the knowledge and capacity gaps expressed by the food and nutrition security implementing community, supporting them in designing and implementation of effective emergency and non-emergency food security activities. IDEAL is led by Save the Children with the consortium partners Kaizen Company, Mercy Corps, and Tango International. Nothing is as powerful as collaboration. We're stronger together, and the movement is a remarkable example of this strength, of how people have shed logos and egos to work together for a cause that we all believe in. IDEAL and Save the Children are proud to have been part of this collaborative journey, and today we at Save the Children would like to reiterate our commitment to the movement and its work. This is a moment in time where there's a confluence of factors that are providing some momentum for effective community-led development. With challenges of COVID and renewed efforts by donors such as USAID and others, and new thinking about concepts such as decolonization and localization, now is the time to put this research to use and to make some breakthroughs to achieve greater impact in our shared goals. So now I'd like to express some deep gratitude for Ambassador Steinberg for his inspiring words and his relentless belief in nothing for us without us. Susan Wong for seeding the idea for the research and for her thoughtful comments on how to apply these findings to our work. To Carrie and to Tim, my fellow movement partners, thank you for leading by example. For Zippy, of course, so refreshing and remarkable to have amongst us a government official who understands, supports, and advocates very eloquently for CLD. USAID, the USAID team at BHA, Karine, and Wa, who have been constant pillar of support and guidance. My team at IDEAL for all the behind the scenes work it takes to select and support projects like this in IDEAL's small grants program. The Hunger Project that works tirelessly to keep the movement alive. Big congratulations to you, the movement, the entire research and operations team that put together the remarkable event. And finally, a big thank you to the translators and all of our participants, local CBOs from all over the world, INGO colleagues, funders, policymakers, researchers. Thank you for being with us. We really hope that you take the findings from this work forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brian. And I am so tempted to also thank people, but